The first combat operations of Desert Storm barely started a few hours before Lieutenant Commander Michael Scott Speicher vanished out of thin air. Soon after, reports confirmed that his FA-18 Hornet had been shot down over the scorching Iraqi desert, sparking a national crisis. Chilling footage of the jet's wreckage scattered across the desert kept Americans glued to their televisions. Friends and family of Speicher held on to the hope that he had ejected and survived. But the U.S. military claimed no evidence suggested he could have lived through the crash. To Speicher's family, the Navy was leaving him behind. 12 years later, deep within a dark cell in Iraq's Hakmiyah prison, American troops uncovered shocking evidence that forced investigators to consider a haunting possibility. Speicher had once been held there, and he might still be alive. Operation Desert Storm had just been greenlit, and Lieutenant Commander Michael Scott Speicher was already pushing through hostile Iraqi skies. It was January 17, 1991, the opening night of the Gulf War, and Speicher's mission was as clear as it was risky: knock out Iraq's radar defenses. As part of Strike Fighter Squadron 81, or the Sunliners, Speicher was one of the first aviators off the deck of USS Saratoga, flying his FA-18 Hornet right into the heart of Saddam Hussein's territory. Around 3 a.m., Speicher's jet, Bureau number 163484, sped through the pitch-black sky at nearly 540 knots and 28,000 feet. As he flew over a desolate stretch of desert roughly 100 miles west of Baghdad, contact was abruptly lost. Just like that, something went wrong. Later, an assessment of the crash site revealed the aircraft had likely been hit by a missile. The sudden blow apparently sent the jet spinning. The whole aircraft was thrown violently off its path, and within seconds, it was plunging to the desert floor. By morning, the wreckage was confirmed. Charred pieces of the Hornet strewn across the sands, a brutal reminder that Saddam Hussein's forces were more than capable of dealing damage to America. U.S. officials quickly recognized this as the first combat loss of Desert Storm. Yet, even with the wreckage, Speicher's fate was up in the air, with no sign of a body and no clear answers. His disappearance set off a nightmarish wait for his family and for the American public. It marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt it for years. Back in the U.S., news of Speicher's downed FA-18 hit hard. As Americans watched the unfolding conflict from their living rooms, the Speicher family held on to the hope that he had ejected and was alive somewhere in the Iraqi desert. It wasn't just wishful thinking. The lack of a visible body and the training American pilots had when it came to bailing have credence to this theory. But on May 22, 1991, only months after the Gulf War's official end, the Navy delivered devastating news. Speicher's status was formally changed from missing in action to killed in action. The military's call came without a body or any solid proof. It was just based on the crash's severity. To the Navy, the change was just part of the process, a way to close the books on an unresolved case. To Speicher's family and friends, though, it felt like a dismissal, as though he was being written off and forgotten. They were confident he was out there and weren't about to let him be abandoned. One of Speicher's closest friends, fellow Navy pilot Commander Buddy Harris, took up the fight. Harris, who knew the risks but also the skills that Speicher had as a pilot, believed the military was rushing to conclusions. Harris became a relentless advocate for Speicher, pushing for continued investigations and even speaking directly with U.S. officials. He wasn't alone. As the months went by, public frustration grew, and Americans across the country began questioning why the military was so quick to give up on one of their own. For Speicher's family, the new status brought no closure. More heartache fueled the family's determination to keep the search alive. But as more evidence began to emerge in dribs and drabs, the mystery only grew. In December 1993, a small but impactful breakthrough arrived in the form of wreckage fragments spotted by a military official from Qatar. These fragments, scattered across the same stretch of Iraqi desert where Speicher's FA-18 had gone down, were unmistakably from his Hornet. But the distance between the aircraft's remains and its canopy raised the first serious questions about Speicher's fate. The canopy, seen several kilometers from the fuselage, suggested Speicher may have ejected before impact, as that would be the exact configuration you would see in an ejection scenario. If that were the case, then he might have been alive after the crash, possibly wandering the desert or captured by enemy troops. But instead of launching a renewed, far-reaching search effort, the Pentagon stayed idle. The U.S. brass regarded the evidence as inconclusive, and they were unwilling to commit resources without explicit proof of Speicher's survival. They argued that there was no evidence he had ejected, no sign that he had survived, and thus, no urgency for additional investigation. This decision didn't sit well with Speicher's family or the growing number of supporters following his case back in the States. Then, in April 1994, a new twist was added to the story. A U.S. satellite scan captured images of human-made symbols etched into the sand near Speicher's crash site. These symbols, which some believed were an escape and evade or E&E sign, fueled more speculation that Speicher had survived the initial downing and had tried to communicate from the ground. The imagery stirred up fresh hope among those closest to him, who saw this as a possible sign he'd been alive and left behind a message. Yet even with this eerie new evidence, the Pentagon's position held firm. The brass determined the findings were inconclusive and denied committing resources to what might be a false lead. The crash site was deep within Saddam Hussein's territory. Reaching it for an investigation would require mounting a massive operation that might put the lives of other Americans at risk. A covert operation to investigate the site again was briefly considered, but General John Shalikashvili, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, put a stop to that idea, labeling it as too risky. The decision infuriated Speicher's supporters, who saw it as a missed opportunity and questioned whether enough was indeed being done to account for him. For Speicher's family, it was a nightmare. They had seen a glimmer of possibility snuffed away by the Pentagon. In 2003, Speicher's case took another dramatic turn amid the U.S. invasion of Iraq. As American forces combed through Iraqi infrastructure after the deposition of Saddam Hussein, a grim discovery was made in Baghdad's Hakmiyah prison. A prisoner's cell wall bore the initials MSS. The possibility that these were Speicher's initials rekindled hope and speculation in America. This evidence was far more tangible than previous claims. The U.S. government could not ignore this development, and they immediately sent investigators to analyze the markings. For Speicher's family and growing pool of supporters, it was the first time they felt they were being listened to in years. The news tore through the country, igniting public outrage and demands for answers. Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, who had long championed Speicher's case, traveled to Iraq himself, determined to see the cell and convinced that the military's efforts fell short. Then, in January 2003, a new document surfaced, a list of prisoners that seemed to include Speicher's name among Iraqi captives. The document stopped short of proving he was alive, yet it fueled hope that Speicher had been a prisoner of war and could still be in a prison somewhere. But nailing down the truth proved tricky. The initials scratched into the cell walls appeared fresh, casting doubt on whether they were made by a long-held prisoner. With no way of authenticating its origin, the prisoner list was discarded as evidence in the case. Even so, investigators desperately scoured the cell for any clue that could link Speicher to the initials on the wall, going as far as collecting human hair samples from a drain to test for DNA. If the DNA results matched Speicher's profile, there would be undeniable proof he survived the crash. Yet, when the DNA tests came back, the results were a gut punch for the family. They didn't match Speicher. Some supporters speculated the initials could still be his, but the prisoner of war theory began to seem less likely by the minute. Despite their continued efforts, Speicher's family seemed to be no closer to solving the mystery. After 18 years of uncertainty, the mystery of Michael Scott Speicher's fate was finally put to rest in August 2009. Acting on a tip from local Iraqis, U.S. Marines from the 3rd Battalion 3rd Marines uncovered human remains buried in the desert sands west of Baghdad, not far from Speicher's crash site. Among the remains, a jawbone was recovered and sent to Charles C. Carson Center for Mortuary Affairs in Dover, Delaware, where DNA tests confirmed the identity of the fallen pilot. It appeared the Bedouins, a local nomadic tribe, had discovered Speicher's body back in 1991 and buried him there out of respect, unaware of the case that would grow around his disappearance. This seemingly innocuous action would leave the crash site without a body for the entire ordeal. Senator Bill Nelson would later describe the challenging circumstances that had kept Speicher's remains hidden for so long. These Bedouins roam around in the desert. They don't stay in one place. Speicher's return brought closure to those who had held on to hope for nearly 2 decades. In Jacksonville, Florida, family, friends, and fellow service members held a heartfelt burial with full military honors. Speicher was remembered as a devoted father and a symbol of American sacrifice. Speicher's legacy was marked by a memorial headstone at Arlington National Cemetery and the F/A-18 Hornet, dedicated in his honor at NAS Pensacola. To this day, Speicher remains the most recent American pilot to be shot down in air-to-air combat. His story, though grim, was pivotal in changing military procedures when it comes to missing pilots so that, hopefully, a case like his never happens again.